Hey, good afternoon to you. 306 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL. We're making sense of the news. Coming up, 3:30 from the Immigration Reform Law Institute. Matt O'Brien is here. The lawsuits are already getting fired up as Joe Biden attempts to deliver amnesty to illegal aliens in our country. We'll talk to Matt about that. Hung Cao joins us. The Navy captain will be with us at 4 o'clock. And now the nominee for Senate, the Republican Party in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We'll talk to him about his victory yesterday and what it's going to take to win in November. Lorenzo Sewell is here, the senior pastor at a big church in Detroit, Michigan. He was just with President Trump this past weekend. I'll talk about that experience and more. That's at 4:30. And then at 5 o'clock, Adam Credo joins us from the Washington Free Beacon as that pier, that publicity stunt pier Joe Biden was trying to build into Gaza, well, it's fallen apart. $230 million down the toilet in the Mediterranean. Typical. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yes, in addition to the struggling economy, I've got a whole litany of stories today about the way the Biden administration is just far too incompetent to even spend the money that they keep taking from us in a way that meets their goals. All sorts of things, whether it's rural internet access or piers into Gaza or electric vehicle charging stations. These guys are fantastic at wasting your money and not actually delivering on their own radical agenda. It really is an amazing thing to watch. I've got a lot of data on that today. The other thing, and I was, I in preparing for the program, always have these great conversations with Corey and Gannon. I was just talking to him a moment ago about this, and I'll share it here with you now, which is, don't you feel like there are elements right now going on in our news and coming out of the White House that remind you so much of the 2020 campaign? Just so much, just the way that things are being built up by the left heading into the 2024 campaign. Reporting this morning out of Axios that the Biden campaign is insisting on running on, quote, democracy. Remember, back in 2020, they ran on the battle for the soul of the nation, which is really just something that John Meacham wrote for Joe Biden, and Biden's used it ever since. Now they are trying to run on the same thing, same thematic thing. They're running on January 6th, the high holy day of January 6th, 2021. And there's all sorts of debates on the left among senior Democrats about whether or not this is a good idea. But people are so scared of Biden world internally that they don't really want to voice their objections on the record for fear that they will be banished. In fact, here's the way Axios describes it this morning. They say senior Democrats, including some of President Biden's aides, are increasingly dubious about his theory for victory in November, which relies on voter concerns about January 6th. Political violence, democracy, and Donald Trump's character. A Democrat strategist in touch with the campaign told Axios, quote, it's unclear to many of us watching from the outside whether the president and his core team realize how dire the situation is right now and whether they even have a plan to fix it. That is scary, end quote. People close to the president told Axios they worry about raising concerns in meetings because Biden's group of longtime loyal aides can exile dissenters. That's right. You have a conflicting opinion about strategy, you're gone. You're not allowed here. Not on the left. Diversity is not our strength. No, they don't want any outside views. They don't need any advice. Now, you read a story like this and you think about it. One, you chuckle at the idea that Biden is running on a losing strategy and the Democrats know it and they don't know what to do about it. That's kind of amusing. But also, the scarier reaction to this story, and one that a part of me kind of identifies with, is these guys are acting like they have it in the bag. They're willing to run on a losing strategy in the eyes of the voters because why? Presumably they have some confidence they're going to win this thing, no matter what. Now, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Voters are scoffing at Biden's strategy. Surveys demonstrate that they think that Biden is a greater threat to, quote, democracy than Donald Trump is, and that instead Donald Trump is actually the guy who would preserve the republic. Voters truly think that, and that keeps on popping up in survey after survey. So it's ridiculous what Biden is running on. Another piece here. You know, I've been thinking quite a bit about this, the terror threats that we have to the country. We keep seeing people, illegal aliens, foreign nationals, pouring into our country and then being swept up. And sometimes we get press releases from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or we see a media piece, or you see guys crash into the gate at Quantico and you find out they're Jordanian nationals and you're wondering what the hell is going on. The Biden administration not giving you much information. But some information's coming out. And sometimes they're saying, well, these guys were on the terror watch list, or we made a determination that they were a terror threat to the United States, or they were in touch with ISIS-K, or they were in touch with some terror organization. Christopher Wray goes before Congress and he says that there's warning flashing lights about terror threats pouring across our border. Christopher Wray says that. And I do wonder what happens if the unthinkable happens? What if we really do get a horrific terror attack between now and Election Day? What will the public reaction be to that? How will people handle that? Now, one would assume, if in a rational world, that if a terror attack came by virtue of our open southern border, that you would hold accountable the guy who made that happen. You would hold President Biden accountable for that. But you never know. You never know in 2024. You don't know how Americans are going to react to that. People get scared by terror attacks, as you would think people do. Of course they do. And in reaction to it, they often turn somewhat naively to the federal government for help. You know, what did we do in the wake of 9/11? Well, the country seemed to kind of roll over for the Patriot Act and all of the various threats to our liberty in the wake of 9/11, because people kind of had a good faith expectation, unfortunately, that the government was going to stand up for us and was going to use these powers that we seemed to all agree with at the time, most of us did anyway, to protect us. And instead, they turned around and they trampled on civil liberties and attacked Americans and used these powers to go after them. A terror attack is never a good thing. The loss of life, of course, is horrific. And the loss of liberty is the next chapter of it. And you do wonder what it would mean politically. What would happen? Again, one would assume that you would hold Biden accountable for something like that, but you never know. People may all of a sudden run into the arms of the federal government and the current commander-in-chief. So that's a wild card. And so I'm concerned about the terror threats coming across our border, but I'm also suspicious of the Biden officials who tell me about it. Aren't you? Isn't there any part of you that's like, okay, you opened the border. Now you're warning me about the threats? Sorry, I'm not that interested in your assessments, given what you've done to us. And the other piece, here's a big one that reminds me of 2020. The censorship campaign that's underway right now to get Joe Biden across the finish line. Remember, in 2020, we, of course, had the laptop saga. We had the Hunter Biden laptop story. It published in October. The New York Post comes out with it. It's a blockbuster. It's genuinely Hunter Biden's laptop. Genuinely contains all sorts of damning information about the way the Biden family has enriched itself at our expense. And the Biden campaign is able to move heaven and earth in collaboration with the intelligence community and the big media companies and the social media companies and the Aspen Institute and all of these various organizations, these non-governmental organizations, all working, collaborating to suppress one of the most important stories this century, and certainly in American presidential politics. They destroy the ability for the public to even see it. And for those of us who did see it, they try and convince us that it's a Russian disinformation campaign. By now, you know all of the contours, the details of this. But this very week, we're seeing it happen again. This time, it's not the laptop, although, of course, the laptop continues to deserve scrutiny. This time, it's Biden's failing body, his failing mind, his very decline in public. We keep seeing video after video, footage of Joe Biden being incapable of conducting doing normal things in public. In fact, even yesterday, he was stumbling all over himself trying to refer to the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, at an event where he was announcing amnesty for hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens in our country and celebrating Obama's previous amnesty 12 years ago. Biden couldn't speak yesterday. You should see the White House transcript today. They don't even bother issuing corrections. They just write inaudible, inaudible, inaudible. Even that's a lie. They should write unintelligible, unintelligible, unintelligible. The president can't. I kid you not, yesterday we had Tammy Bruce on moments after he did that. We were on a commercial break. I hear the audio, and I think instantly, okay, we're literally about to talk about this subject with Tammy. We're going to talk about what's going on with this guy's mind and the cover-up that the White House is trying to orchestrate on the subject. And he just did this a moment ago, played the audio as we came in for Tammy Bruce. And then we were underway with our great conversation. She's so good. But the White House is insisting that these videos are fake. They're saying that real footage of Joe Biden amounts to either deep or, quote, cheap fakes. When was the first time you heard the phrase cheap fake? When was the very first time you heard that phrase? Was it this week? For me, the answer is yes. I had never heard of the phrase cheap fake. I follow so much of this, of course, for a living. We've heard the phrases misinformation and disinformation and deep fake and all these other various terms meant to describe misleading things in the modern era. But cheap fake, hadn't heard of that. Hadn't heard of that. Now, apparently, there are some corners of the world who have tried to popularize the phrase and use it in the past, but very few have, at least in the popular consciousness. And this week, the White House decided they're going to wield this term, cheap fake. And what they're referring to is literally just videos of Biden actually declining in front of our very eyes. And they're suggesting that there's something suspicious about the videos themselves. And so what has happened since then? Well, the news media has immediately and obediently retailed this talking point. It's everywhere. The Associated Press, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, you take your pick, you're going to find it. They're carrying the White House's water. And of course, this is meant to interfere in the election. It's not a simple act of journalism. It's an act of activism. And of course, we've come to expect this from the corporate left-wing media. Tom Elliott over at Grabien has run the data over the course of the last 3 days. And just 2 hours ago, he published this data. And what he discovered was this. The corporate press has spent 49 television hours so far circulating the White House's cheap fake talking points. In just the last 3 days, they have, for 49 hours, spent that time trying to convince their audiences that video of Joe Biden that you can see with your own eyes isn't real, that it's a, quote, cheap fake. And so the same kind of things that afflicted the 2020 election, the censorship regimes, the big media interference, you're seeing it happen again this week. And this is not the only week. This is not the only topic, but this is a great example of it. And today we get an additional story on this, and it involves the social media companies. Now, I talk about the big tech companies, the corporate news companies. Now let's talk about the social media companies. According to Politico today, the Biden campaign has launched a so-called task force to mitigate the risks posed by AI and cheap fakes, but stressed that the responsibility rests with social media platforms and news companies. Quote, voters deserve accurate information to inform their choice this November, and our campaign will be vigilant in calling out these lies when we see them, said a Biden campaign spokesperson, Mia Ehrenberg, a spokeswoman, presumably, unless it's actually a guy who's identifying as a woman. You never know these days. Quote, we hope media organizations and others with influential platforms follow our lead. Doesn't this feel familiar? So now you have the Biden campaign launching a, quote, task force. And you can be sure when you say the Biden campaign, that also means the White House. And that very well could mean the FBI. And that very well could mean the intel agencies. And that very well could mean the constellation of NGOs around the White House who support the White House's agenda, and on and on and on. Now bringing to bear yet another pressure campaign on the social media companies to suppress information that is relevant to the voting public. This time, it's literally video of Biden in public. It doesn't get more clear than that. It doesn't get more obviously true than that. And yet the Biden campaign is launching a, quote, task force to pressure the social media companies to banish it. It's happening as we speak. We'll keep documenting it as long as we can get away with it. It's 3:21 now. You know, one of the many ironies of the Biden campaign, the Biden White House claiming that all these videos of him are fake, is the actual footage that they choose to post to their social media accounts is so highly edited, it's unreal. They're constantly airbrushing the wrinkles off of his face before they post these pictures. Like, actually, the cheap fakes, that's what you're producing. What a scam. What a complete scam. We've got Doug calling in right now from Newark, Delaware, line 2. Doug, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Vince, good afternoon. This is just amazing. I mean, what do they think? They think that people are going to buy this, that they're not seeing what they're seeing? I just can't believe it. And they're going to try to get away. Who's going to pay for all that investigations and everything like that, too? To shut these people down, like Facebook and censoring. Who's going to pay for them for that? Mm-hmm. Government? Mm-hmm. We're wasting money. But I'm just saying, for them to even put that out there, and like we're supposed to believe that. Everything they're showing, just like you just said, is edited. So what? It's funny, man. This world is crazy.
It is crazy, and it's the most brazen thing ever. It's so funny. It's like there's literally nothing you could say, literally nothing that you can say.
You can't talk to them.
Yeah.
Nope.
No.
Absolutely unbelievable.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah. No. To Doug's point. To Doug's. Sorry, Doug. You and I are talking over each other. I just wanted to make this point, which is, it's like you could have bulletproof evidence that what they're doing is the wrong thing. You could have them backed completely into a corner. You show them video footage of Biden freezing up for an entire minute, and then they'll look at you with a straight face and they say, that's fake. I'm sorry, no, it's not. It's completely real. You know, the video of Biden at that fundraiser this weekend wasn't shared by the RNC, wasn't shared by the Trump campaign. Eventually it was. Do you know who shared it originally? The Hollywood Reporter. Literally, one of their journalists just captured video from the stands, and they said, there's Biden. He's freezing up before he goes off the stage. And the White House's position is that the Hollywood Reporter had just launched what they're now calling a cheap fake. No, it's a guy's video just shot from his seat at the fundraiser. It's real. No, it's fake, they said, as they try to gaslight America yet again. Stay with us. Matt O'Brien is going to be with us reacting to Joe Biden's amnesty announcement yesterday. The lawsuits are flying, deservedly so. Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up today, U.S. Senate candidate Hung Cao joins us, the retired Navy captain. We'll talk about his big victory in the Republican primary yesterday in the Commonwealth of Virginia and how he's going to win this general election. Looking forward to that conversation. At 4:30, we're going to talk to Lorenzo Sewell. He's the senior pastor at the 180 Church in Detroit, Michigan. Just had a big meeting with President Trump this past weekend. We'll ask him all about it. And Adam Credo will be with us from the Washington Free Beacon as another Biden publicity stunt falls apart and sinks into the sea. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yesterday, the Biden administration, Joe Biden himself, announcing an amnesty for hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, here in the United States of America. I should point out that illegal aliens and the open border are wildly unpopular with the American voter, but the Biden administration decided they would twist the knife yesterday. And it's not without some pushback. In fact, there are a number of groups who are now launching lawsuits against the Biden administration, trying to stop this atrocity. And among them, my next guest from the Immigration Reform Law Institute, the Director of Investigations, Matt O'Brien, is with us now. Matt, great to have you with us on the show, sir.
Thank you very much.
What to make of Joe Biden's announcement yesterday and this decision to offer amnesty this year?
Well, this is DACA all over again. So they got called by the court down in Texas for doing the illegal DACA program, and they can't rely on deferred action. So what they decided to do was twist the parole authority all out of whack so that they can create another amnesty by executive fiat, and it's just an unconstitutional abuse of the parole power.
Yeah, in other words, like they're telling hundreds of thousands of people who are here illegally hey, no problem, you violated the nation's laws. We're just going to ignore that and, in fact, put you on a pathway to citizenship.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's a reward for breaking our immigration laws. I mean, if you think about this in any other area of law, if you break the law, the longer you get away with it, the harsher the sentence. But what we're saying here is that if you've managed to violate the immigration laws for 10 years and then marry an American, now all of a sudden we're going to treat you like somebody who obeyed the law and tried to get a green card the legal way.
I've heard this week the phrase undocumented spouses to refer to the people who are going to be able to get a hold of this amnesty should it come to pass. Does that make any sense to you? Somebody being referred to as an undocumented spouse?
No, the whole term undocumented is silly, and what it's designed to do is try and portray breaking the immigration law as something that's akin to a traffic ticket. However, for the people that are fans of that phrase, undocumented, I suggest the next time they get pulled over by a state trooper and they don't have a license, they try and tell them that they're an undocumented driver. I mean, it's just silliness. It's to try and take away the fact that when you break the immigration laws, what you're essentially doing is engaging in a criminal trespass in the United States.
Sure. Yeah, and when they use phrases like undocumented, they're pretending like it's a jump ball whether or not you're an illegal immigrant. Of course you are. You're an illegal alien. It's not a mystery. You are. That's pretty wild. So what has been the track record with these types of amnesties? When you have somebody like President Obama or now subsequently President Biden announce just by a wave of their hand or just a stroke of the pen that they're granting amnesty to illegal foreign nationals. What is the success rate of those claims?
They're pretty unsuccessful. The problem with these types of plans is that everyone, even the people making them, know they're illegal from the start, and so they're inevitably going to get lawsuits and pushback on this. The trouble is that you will have activist judges in left-leaning courts that will hear suits on behalf of people that get this form of relief, just like they did with DACA, and they'll come up with all kinds of silly pseudo-civil rights reasons why people shouldn't be deported after they got this or why this entitles them to something, which that's the major danger with these kind of programs because we have an Immigration and Nationality Act that sets out requirements for coming into the U.S. for a reason. Yeah. And under our system, the president can't just unilaterally decide to change that because he doesn't like it. It requires an authorization from Congress.
Well, one of the obvious impacts of just offering waivers to violations of law by illegal foreign nationals is you're disenfranchising American citizens in any number of ways. One of them is by taking their hard-earned tax dollars and then using them on people who don't deserve them to begin with. Another is if you're turning foreign nationals who broke our laws to get in here into American citizens, you are watering down the voting rights of American citizens everywhere by granting that privilege to people who shouldn't be here in the first place.
I couldn't agree with you more. And then you add to that the problem that you're sending a clear message to the rest of the world that we don't care about the security of our borders and we don't care about our own immigration laws. And it tells people if you get here and you manage to stay, eventually we will reward you with the ultimate gift, a path to American citizenship because you broke our laws. And it's a slap in the face to all the law-abiding immigrants who have been waiting in line for years in places like India and the Philippines.
Yeah, that has been the pattern, hasn't it? So when America has offered amnesties from time to time, and each time that's only led to more illegal migration into the country, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. The reason that we're having the problem that we have now with immigration is because the 1986 amnesty. And the 1986 amnesty is the amnesty that wouldn't die. I mean, there have been classes of people that didn't apply for it for whatever reason, some because they had criminal convictions, some of them because they failed to meet deadlines. And they've gone in and sued, and the courts have found that, they're entitled to another bite at the apple. So the 86 amnesty, the final legal action that took place on it was sometime around like 2015, 2016.
Right. Yet Congress, every so often, they keep working up, including Republicans, a couple years back. Remember that Lindsey Graham amnesty? These guys were all trying to figure out yet another way to offer amnesty. It just never works out well, does it?
No, it doesn't, because this is something that every parent understands. If you reward bad behavior, what do you get? More bad behavior. So if you want to have a coherent immigration system, you have to apply it equally across the board, and you can't undermine it by your own actions. And I think what Republicans like Lindsey Graham don't understand is that when they support these measures, they think that they're somehow being kind to people. But what they're doing is they're undermining the border security, which, when taken to its logical extension, leads to the kind of chaos that we have on the southern border now, and basically gets people killed. It's not kind to encourage these kinds of policies.
No.
It leads to human smuggling, sex trafficking, people dying in the desert when they make poor decisions about how to get here. It's just very cruel.
So as I understand, you can help me with the legal side of this. When you bring a lawsuit against the federal government for something like this, or against Joe Biden, the Biden administration, typically you have to establish that you have standing, that you have a party that's been harmed here. How do you do that when you bring these legal cases?
Well, typically with cases like these, you want a state as a client. And because of the interest, particularly that border states have, they can go ahead and challenge these kind of actions. Even some of the states in the interior have been successful with claims based on the amount of money that they have to spend in order to fund these programs. So that's one way. Occasionally, you will have a situation where an individual is negatively affected by this, and you can bring a suit on behalf of the individual. But these things are complex, and there have been a few of these lawsuits that have been tried where they were, in fact, lost on the standing issue. So this is a complicated thing, but it's important because it's hard to convey how flagrant the complete and intentional ignorance of the Immigration and Nationality Act is here. The Biden administration knows that it is violating the existing law, and it thinks it can get away with it, so that's why it's doing it.
So can like Laken Riley's family sue the federal government? Can Rachel Morin's family, the families of people who've been killed by illegal aliens who were allowed into the country by the feds, do they have standing in a court process?
Most often they don't, because there's a line of Supreme Court cases saying that while the government has a responsibility to provide basic law and order services and things like fire protection, it doesn't have a legal obligation to protect any specific individual in a certain circumstance. And that's based on the otherwise reasonable notion that there's no way the government can guarantee all of our safety. But that's frustrating, because if I were Laken Riley's parents, I would be thinking that there ought to be a way for me to sue the government, because this is completely irresponsible. And the fact is that every crime that is committed by an illegal alien is a crime that by definition was 100% preventable, because if that person wasn't in the United States, they wouldn't have been able to prey upon an American.
So as I mentioned at the outset, Matt O'Brien, and we're talking to Matt, again, O'Brien from the Immigration Reform Law Institute, there are a number of organizations that are already firing up lawsuits against Biden for the amnesty he announced yesterday. Can you give me a sense of the battlefield? How much more active are people nowadays, legal organizations, in trying to stop all of this? And what are you seeing out there?
Well, it's interesting. So under the prior administration, what we were doing was trying to defend actions that were lawful, that were being taken in order to protect the American public. What's happened now is that we are trying to find ways to contest actions that aren't lawful. And we've had a history, unfortunately, over the last 4 or 5 decades with administrations, both Republican and Democrat, ignoring portions of the immigration law that they either dislike or that they feel puts them in a negative position with constituencies that they want to appeal to. And it's sort of an up and down trying to deal with those. But what we've seen with the DACA program, and now under this administration with the number of different programs they've tried, there's just a complete unwillingness to obey the law and a flagrant disregard to just try and do things by executive fiat without going through the constitutional process and seeking congressional authorization. And that's coupled with a lot of bad decisions from activist judges who want to make policy from the bench rather than applying the law to the facts like they're bound to by their oath.
Matt O'Brien, have you ever seen an administration that has been quite as unconstitutionally guided as the Biden administration?
Never. And I mean, the abuse of the parole authority is a perfect example. Parole is a legal fiction that pretends that somebody is at the border applying to get in while they're physically allowed into the U.S. And it exists for the convenience of the U.S. government. It's really an artifact of the Cold War when it allowed the U.S. to give temporary shelter to communist dissidents. And it was always something that was done on a case-by-case basis, and it was used very infrequently. Well, when the amnesty was rolled out in 1986, the Immigration and Naturalization Service started giving pre-authorized parole to people who needed to leave the United States while they were waiting for their amnesty applications to be approved. And that was never an intended use of parole, and that's not anything that is consistent with the parole statute. And this parole in place program was done without any statutory authorization as a benefit for military spouses, because commanders were expressing concerns that service members who had married illegal aliens were worried about them while they were on deployment. And it's frustrating to me. I think we have laws for a purpose, and if the government doesn't obey them, then we're in a situation of anarchy. And at least in prior administrations, there was a respect for the fact that parole was a special power for the convenience of the government that should be used sparingly. And now they're trying to convert it into a get-out-of-jail-free pass for every immigration violator who has unlawfully entered the U.S. And that's a scary prospect, because it means none of our immigration laws mean anything if there's a catch-all exemption that the government can use whenever it wants.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that these days. Matt O'Brien, again, with the Immigration Reform Law Institute. Thank you, sir, for your expertise and your time today. Really good to talk to you. My thanks again to Matt O'Brien for joining us. I mentioned the death of Rachel Morin, the Maryland mother, killed by an illegal alien. And this came up on CNN, of all places, in a conversation between Jim Acosta and Alejandro Mayorkas. Listen, as neither of them even dare say her name. They refuse to. And oh my gosh, Jim Acosta.
I do want to ask you about the murder of this Maryland mother that has been in the news. It's gotten a lot of attention. She was killed last year. An undocumented immigrant. Just arrested, and her death last week. He's suspected of multiple crimes since he crossed the border illegally in early 2023. Obviously, we know that the studies show that undocumented immigrants don't commit more crimes statistically.
Americans are worse than foreign nationals, is what CNN's Jim Acosta is saying.
Than native-born U.S. citizens. But what do you say to critics who blame the administration for allowing something like this to happen? Yeah, obviously, this is something that you hear in right-wing media all the time.
It's right-wingers who are raising this. This guy can't ask a real question. Yes, a jerk.
Jim, first and foremost, of course, our hearts break for the children, the family, the loved ones, the friends of the individual who was murdered.
The individual?
The woman, the mother.
The woman, the mother.
Jim.
What is a woman?
A criminal is responsible for the criminal act.
No kidding.
The criminal who committed this heinous act should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law, and forcefully so. That is my response.
How pathetic. Of course, he let him in. What about the people who've aided and abetted this criminal? Do his crimes include crossing our border illegally? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. But he can't bring himself to say that. Let's go to the phones. I've got Donna calling in from Frederick today on line 2. Donna, good afternoon to you. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Oh, good afternoon, Vince. I wanted to tell you that a lot of what we hear, especially from the leftist media, we've got our share of rhino media, and that's annoying me as well. And it's the bigger conglomerates. But nonetheless, we have to think mirror that whatever they're trying to project, because they're covering up, they have their lies, they have their crimes, and they probably have some history that's rather unpleasant involving minors. So they will stop at nothing to defend themselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, even on that particular thing, that's not even much of a secret. The Jeffrey Epstein saga has all sorts of co-conspirators who've never been brought in front of courts to assess the questions in that very important and awful scandal. But you're right. That's my instinct too, Donna. You know, when I look at these stories, when I hear these accusations from the left, thanks to their torrential downpour of lies, my first instinct always is to suspect, wait a second, they're accusing us of what they're doing. Yeah, that's a good way to view it. Joining us next, Hung Kao is with us. He's tired of this amnesty. He's a legal immigrant, and he saw Biden announce that amnesty yesterday. He's horrified by it too, and now he's this close to being in a position to do something about it. Running for Senate in Virginia. We'll talk to Hung Kao in a moment.